Welcome to the Work Podcast, brought to you by Open Assembly. I'm John Windsor, and today I'm with Connor Heaney. Connor leads CXC for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. He works to execute the CXC vision in shaping the future of work with a focus on solving clients' contingent workforce problems and playing a part in their daily success stories. How are you doing today, Connor?
Hey, John, I'm doing great, and thanks so much for having me on. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm especially doing great because I bought a new motorcycle a couple of days ago. So I'm just talking to Brandon about it. I'm super stoked and got out for a ride right at midnight last night. So, or not at midnight, but just as it was getting dark, it was just super fun up on the dirt. So yeah.
You need to get to Colorado, John.
You do. I know.
Life is too pedestrian these days, I can tell you, in Ireland. John, thanks for the introduction. What we do, by the way, sounds bloody boring when you read it out, even in your most eloquent, engaged tone. Thanks for the introduction.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, let's tell us a little bit about your background. Like, how did you get to CXC?
Sure. I had a circuitous journey, John, not quite a dirt track journey. So I started my career as a commercial lawyer. Actually, one step back further, I started my career as a criminal lawyer, working on large criminal cases, a lot of human rights cases, back home where I come from in Northern Ireland, in a place called Belfast. So unfortunately, criminal law does not pay the bills, John, and I moved into commercial law. But for any lawyers listening, I found commercial law extremely boring. And a friend of mine was working as a headhunter in London at the time. So headhunter, not a Brazilian tribe, not in Papua New Guinea. Headhunters in English lingo or English language mean recruitment. So a friend of mine was working in IT recruitment. I actually did not understand what recruitment was, John. I actually thought I was going to interview to be some sort of commodities trader, because when I went to the interview, it was set up like an open outcry trading floor. Back in the day, you think Wolf of Wall Street or Wall Street, back with Michael Douglas, and it was just a cacophony of noise. And I absolutely loved it, John. And I stayed in staffing or recruitment with a company called Aston Carter that became part of the Legis Group. But in no disrespect do I mean to my recruitment and staffing industry brothers and colleagues, it's an extremely hard job. It's an unworthy job. It's a lucrative job when you're really good at it, but it only solves one part of the problem, right? And I was always thinking, John, about things in the round. Oh God, sorry, that's my wife.
No worries.
But I was always.
You want to take that?
No, all good, John. But I was always thinking about things in the round, about solving some of the more fundamental problems that our clients were facing. So how do they get lots of talent? How do they get a mix of talent? How do they get talent from overseas? How do they know that they're resource demand planning? How are they marrying, I guess, their talent demand with external and internal supply? So back about 8 years ago, we set up a resource demand planning software, and we sold it to quite a few banks and big companies. And then I moved into technology, and we set up in Europe one of the first talent exchanges, a company called Intellex. Unfortunately, we ran out of money. So good lesson learned. Don't run out of money.
Totally right.
But the concept was right, if not a bit too early, John. So this was back in 2013. Mm-hmm. So I went back into staffing in order to pay the bills, and I couldn't wait to get out of it, John. Frankly, I just didn't have the energy anymore, and we were just only solving one part of the problem.
Right.
And I got to meet a guy called Dave Thomas, who most of your listeners might not have heard of, but he's the chairman of CXC Global. And what he wanted to do was set up a company in Europe to really be the glue, the plumbing, the infrastructure of the gig economy. And what he meant by that, and what I meant by that, is we wanted to be the compliant payroll firewall engine between gig economy or end users of contingent labor and the workers that they engaged. And that was really in response, John, to huge regulatory convergence that came from the USA. You guys have that 20-point test, and when
Right.
is a contractor not a contractor? So
Right.
Europe always follows USA, probably a couple of years behind, right? And then when we do follow the USA, we go overboard, right? We go to the nth degree and make it even more complex and more difficult to do business.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's wide in Europe. But we set up CXC in Europe really for that express purpose, John. And we want to be what we consider the compliant connector. So we're that intermediary between end users and finders of contingent labor and the contingent labor themselves. So we've set up this huge infrastructure around the globe. John, we're in 65 countries. We've got 42 legal entities, and we're solving really complex problems around cross-border hiring, working with talent marketplaces, bringing direct sourcing into various different companies. So it's been a hell of a ride, and I've been here 6 years now, and I bloody love it, John.
That's awesome. Well, it's so great. Thanks a lot for kind of, giving the background, because I think most listeners are come from the innovation and, platform space. And I one of the things I find really interesting about CXC is that, like you said, it's kind of the connective tissue or the glue that's going to put these two systems together. And I'd love to ask you about that. Like, it seems like this is such a moving target right now, right? With COVID, especially, all of a sudden we've got a place where companies, can't hire the right talent. I mean, it seems like, at least in the US, right, it's just really, really hard. Like, labor supply is really hard right now as we come out of COVID. Yet, there's so much talent out there in the world, and so we've got to think about new ways to connect with talent. So what are you seeing? What's most interesting right now that you're seeing?
I think COVID has been a force multiplier, John, for change in how we work, from a remote work perspective, a future work perspective. It's been an accelerator for the platform and the talent marketplace economy. But if I could expand and answer your question specifically, what we're seeing across the globe is what you're seeing in the USA. We're seeing a shortage of talent, a demand for talent like you've never seen. But what we've also seen is the large enterprise, the buy side, willing to look to new markets, new geographies to source that talent, either to crowdsource that talent, to get it through a marketplace, to get it through a Freelancer.com and Upwork. There's now this recognition and need that the world has suddenly become a lot smaller, right? So we've got companies willing to look at accessing talent differently and accessing talent globally to meet, I suppose, their talent shortage, right, John? So that's number one. That's number one trend that we're seeing in the market right now. The second thing is we're seeing huge labor or talent arbitrage in the marketplace. So if you think about it, USA company, let's say, I'm going to say Google, but it could be any technology company. Let's say they have traditionally paid $300K for a contractor in the Bay Area to do a small piece of work or some sort of technology work. They're now looking to places like Slovakia, where the labor cost is roughly 8 times less than it is in the USA. And because the remote work and the remote access model has been proven, they're now no longer reluctant to stay away from their workers. They're now saying, well, A, we can get the talent we need when we need it, because we're using technology to procure, find, engage that talent. And 2, we're getting a massive cost saving when compared to hiring someone in our home market. So I think they're the 2 macro trends that we're seeing, John, globally and locally here in Europe. And the third thing that we're seeing is this huge amount of digital transformation in the medium to large enterprise space, John. And that's fueling this demand for technologists, consultants, doers, thinkers, executors in that particular space. So I've never seen a jobs market either locally here in Europe or regionally or globally. I think it's really the bonanza time.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Yeah. And so you're getting calls from technology companies to do that. Like, in our experience at the lab at Harvard, so many companies are really excited about the open talent marketplace, but yet they really struggle with, like, how do I bring freelancers in? Not just to mechanical part of it, but also the cultural part, right? The identity of like, man, if I go out to the open market, what's that say to me, about my abilities? If somebody in Slovakia is 8 times cheaper and twice as smart, right? How are you helping companies deal with that kind of culture change?
Yeah, I think there's the culture piece, John, which I'll come on to. I think that there's also an education piece to help procurement buyers sell this internally, to say, you know what, this is going to change how we do things, but we got to do it in order to be more efficient, more effective, and to get the talent we need and deliver on our projects. But if we look at the cultural piece, John, I think as companies move to adopt an open talent model or adopt contingent workforce, a lot of the predictions are saying that by 2027, there'll be 50% of workers that are actually non-permanent, they're extended workforce. So that cultural mishmash, I think, will be lessened as the acceptance and use of freelancers, independent workers become much more commonplace. And I also think for workers today, I think there's a realization, it may not be a welcome realization or even a pretty realization, that no one has a job for life, right?
Yeah, exactly.
What COVID has demonstrated, at least to me, John, is that whole industries can be put out of business overnight, right?
Yeah.
Who would have thought back in February 2020 that there would be no planes flying in continental Europe, right? That the pilots that were once highly paid individuals, at least in Europe, we're talking about people on maybe 200K, 300K a year, would be on next to nothing and relying on government handouts. So I think what it's demonstrated is that jobs for life no longer exist, that the multi-job career can exist. And because of that realization amongst the workforce, some of it is forced, John, right? Because of the COVID and the jobs displacement and all that. I think there's a realization that if you're a freelancer or a permanent employee, it doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I even think that what will happen is that, you'll see inside companies that you might have, be assigned to do something 50% of the time, but then there'll be marketplaces that emerge to say, hey, here's some opportunities for work. Here's some opportunities that you can get paid for. Here's some upskilling opportunities. These are the requirements, so that these kind of marketplaces come not only externally, but they start emerging internally as well. And I totally agree with that. It's interesting because it's a big psychological change. For those of us that have always been entrepreneurs, it's awesome. But I think for those of us who have been, in kind of a paternalistic, compliant relationship, it's way more difficult. And I think, I see this kind of emerging as kind of the passion economy, right? And I do think it's a really good thing, because I do think that one of the things that big companies have struggled on for a while is that they've kind of had a passion crisis, right? They like entrepreneurial companies are always super passionate. They're a little zany, and you don't know if they're going to make it to the end, or at least to the end zone, and and be able to be sustainable. But on the other hand, they're always made up of really passionate people about ideas. Whereas, as companies mature, they become much more compliant and focused on rules and regulations, and it just sucks the passion out of the way that they work. And I feel like one of the really interesting outcomes of open talent is it's really a way to reinfuse that passion, right? Get the guy in Slovakia who is really, really smart because he's got 3 PhDs and has that kind of adjacent knowledge, and it's just really passionate. It's not worried about showing up to a culture meeting, for 4 hours, some kind of cultural training. He's just like, I'm going to do a great job, right, on exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, and hey, John, I totally agree with that. I mean, if we look at this metaphysical dude in Slovakia, right? To the best of my knowledge, companies like Google don't have physical bricks and mortar there. So imagine you're a best of breed programmer or whatever the hell you do. Like, how amped up are you going to be able to work for a company in the Bay Area that is thriving, that is growing? Like, how much passion will you bring to that? You're going to be so pumped and jacked up and amped up. It's unreal. And that can only be a good thing. And this sort of cross-border swapping and merging of workers, I think it's absolutely brilliant, John. And I think it's going to have a really positive impact for business, because to bring different cultures together, yes, it is difficult, but it's also really empowering. When you get different people from different parts of the world together, it's amazing. You know, John, if you think about what you've created in Open Assembly, right? You got folks in all over the USA where much of the great ideas are coming from in the platform and open talent economy. But then you got folks like us over in Europe, you got the Barry Matthews, and that mishmash of ideas and innovation and culture, there's only good can come from that, in my view.
I totally agree. No, the conversation's been crazy and really, really fun. Well, you know, you've got such a unique perspective because you play kind of in the more traditional contingent workforce space, and then in the open talent space and crowd space. Give us a lay of the land from your perspective. But what does the ecosystem look like? You know, what's growing and what's shrinking, and what are companies telling you as you build this out? Like, what do they need help with?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that I hear from companies is compliance, right?
Yeah.
They're absolutely so worried and concerned, John, around the compliance elements of engaging freelancers and independent workers. Because if you think about it, it's not just around labor law and misclassification. There's also company law elements to it. There's also taxation elements to it. There's also cross-border intellectual property risk. You know, how can you guarantee that if you're engaging a freelancer in Slovakia and you're in the USA, that your IP that you want them to generate on your behalf is protected? How do you know that, you know, they're not funneling money off to, you know, Grand Cayman or, you know, the British Virgin Islands or Panama or wherever the hell it is? So the enterprise, they really want to embrace the marketplace, the talent marketplace, the open talent economy, because for them, it really comes down to cheaper, faster, better when you compare, and when they compare it and contrast to other sources of securing and procuring talent. But it all comes back, John, to this one word in our view. And that, of course, listen, that's what we do. Maybe that's why they're only talking and speaking with us about that. But that's the one word that comes to mind. They want to do it. They're almost ready to do it. In some cases, they are doing it. But in order for them to tip over into doing this at scale, compliance is what they care about. Compliance
for sure.
is what they want. Because as you will appreciate, John, and your listeners, if you don't get the compliance piece right in a country like Germany over in Europe, the tax authorities have amazing powers, right up to imprisonment, right up to fine, right up to putting your company out of business, right? And the imprisonment goes back right up to the directors and the board of directors. So, you know, if you're big bank A in Germany and you've got this freelancer marketplace and suddenly you've misclassified them, or those freelancers aren't tax compliant, that all comes back up what they call the tax chain. It's called tax chain liability, John. And these tax authorities in countries like Germany and Netherlands, they will actually come to your premises. It'll be like, you know, the flashing blue lights like you see in the movies, except it's not the police, it's the tax authorities. And, you know, the companies, they don't want that reputational, financial, or legal risk. So that's what we're hearing. But the good news is, John, that can be solved, that problem. And there's loads of different steps and mitigation strategies that organizations can take to embrace the open talent economy, but also mitigate the risk. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing
so just for our listeners. So, you know, I'm so intrigued with this. Like, let's just say company A is really interested in hiring, you know, exploring the open talent marketplace, and they're talking to 3 platforms, and they say, okay, platform C is the best access, and they can access the mythical Slovakian, you know, really talented guy, right? Like or woman who is an amazing, you know, software engineer. How do you help in that situation, right? They call you and say, hey, I'm going to connect with this platform, but I want to make sure that we follow the rules, and you sit between the company and the platform, or tell us kind of very, you know, how it works.
At a very high level, we get that call from the enterprise. Typically, it's an enterprise or a buy-side company that we work with. But in recent cases, because of all the cross-border and the labor arbitrage and the access to talent in different markets, It could be just random companies that are struggling to deal with this, but we'll get a call saying, we want to use this particular talent marketplace. Through the talent marketplace, we find 100 customer service people that we want to put into Poland.
Right.
Or work in Poland. We find 20 Java developers for a specific project. And the talent marketplaces aren't geared up for the compliance challenge, right? They're geared up and they're experts at utilizing and deploying their technology to find people to solve that problem cheaper, faster, better.
Right.
So where we come in, John, we've built this fast technology infrastructure that allows us to compliantly onboard workers at scale and size in about 45 different countries and pay them compliantly in accordance with local labor law, local taxation agreements. So what the enterprise is getting there, John, is total risk mitigation, enterprise-wide risk mitigation. So our view is twofold, John. One is we're solving the compliance problem, the compliance challenge, but we can also talk procurement enterprise buyer language. And I think some of the talent marketplaces weren't really set up to deal with procurement. They weren't set up.
Sure.
They weren't, John, like set up to deal with legal and finance, right?
Yeah.
They were set up essentially on the premise, a hiring manager or a business user that's got a company credit card or their own personal credit card. They want a piece of work done for a day, a month, a week, right? Or an hour.
Right.
But that's not the reality of the Fortune 100. That's not the reality of the Fortune 500. That's not the reality of the FTSE 100 enterprise, right? They've got extensive procurement, risk, governance, control, negotiation protocols. So we really see it as our role, John, to step in and really be that agent on behalf of the buy side and also on behalf of the sell side, if you like, and the talent marketplace side. But at a high level, John, that's pretty much how it works.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. And so tell me, like, what's the persona of the typical buyer? Is it in the HR department, or is it in the procurement department, or is it a C-level person that said, I want to change this from a strategic standpoint, or is it a business unit manager saying, I can't solve these problems and I need help with that? Like where in the organization do you usually get the first call?
It's traditionally been procurement in what I would have called pre-COVID contingent workforce management, where it's, we've got 300 workers here, 500 workers here, 200 workers coming on stream here, and we need this whole governance layer around it. And, we could solve that problem through years of experience, John. But the COVID, as I mentioned earlier, has been a force multiplier. So we're now seeing at the C levels with companies, I can't mention their name, but if you think of the top 5 Indian outsourcers, they're household names these days. They're coming to companies like us and saying, we are using marketplaces. We want the marketplaces to have that extra level of governance, that extra level of control, that extra level of compliance. How can you ensure that we can hire 1,000 people in Tunisia, in Poland, in Sweden, and that it's going to keep us whole, that it's going to keep us out of trouble? The other thing, though, John, on the cross-border hiring point of view, now this wouldn't be at scale or size, but we're definitely seeing HR become more involved in these processes, particularly as the workforce mix has changed. And what I mean by that is that it's changed much more from just a permanent workforce to an extended, flexible, alternative workforce. That mishmash has really changed. But they would traditionally be, procurement would be our traditional ally, friend, user, partner, but it's really got prominence at C-level these days, particularly this distributed workforce model that we can help support.
Yeah, I love that. So tell me, like, as you see it rolling out, let's just look at the crystal ball 5 to 10 years from now. Is it really, do you think that open talent will really grow because it's an evolution, or it's a technology, evolution of the outsourcing community, or is it I mean, where does that fit? It feels like, at least what I love about talking to Barry Matthews, right, is Barry's really got that eye on all the outsourcing that's been happening, and those folks have deep connections within the Fortune or the FTSE 100, right? And so that's already been developed, and so it's an innovation. Like open talent platforms are an innovation for those companies to say, wow, I can, now I don't have to have 150,000 employees. I can have, a size to fit, teams all over the world that I can make sure that we can get the work done for our clients. Or is it going to be more direct and more spotty, like in innovation and in marketing and companies using those tools directly? How do you see it playing out 5 to 10 years from now?
I think it's a combination of Barry Matthews' vision that outsourcing will conquer all, and this will be the next extension of the outsourcing world. But also, I've another view on that, John, and it really comes down to this, and I'll try and make it as simple as possible for myself and for the listeners. Organizations no longer want fixed costs, right? They don't want fixed costs, and what I mean by that is they don't want a fixed cost of an employee. It no longer suits their business model. It's too damn expensive. It gives them a legacy in terms of pension liabilities, national insurance liabilities, social insurance liabilities that will run as long as the business is run. For sure. Yeah. And that legacy cost and that fixed cost is problematic for organizations. It allows them, it disenables, if that's the right word, the ability to be flexible. So my view on the open talent and the open platform economy, John, is that it will become a much more partnership, direct relationship with enterprise as they seek to move from this fixed cost model to a variable cost model. And I think there's some disruption there, of course, because there will be job displacement, obviously, but for sure, the more talent marketplaces, then theoretically, the more opportunity, and the more this way of working becomes more common, then people will likely have multiple gigs, multiple jobs, multiple careers, all in parallel with each other. It sounds a bit like the Matrix, doesn't it?
It does, for sure.
But I think there's huge potential disruption with that direct to buyer or direct to company model for the open talent economy. I think the larger managed service providers that look after contingent workforce and talent, the larger staffing and recruitment companies, they almost, in my view, need to get a defensive and offensive position to really protect their current business models or to innovate and embrace the open talent model. Because my concern for them would be, and I predicted this wrongly 8 years ago when I moved into the open talent exchange space, was that, recruitment as it then was dead, right? I thought it was gone. Of course, if you look at all the major staffing companies, they had a horrible year last year, but they're back in business. They've got 20% quarter-on-quarter growth. But, if we looked 5-10 years ahead, I would be concerned if I was running a major global MSP and I hadn't either bought, acquired a talent marketplace in some description. And I thought actually Randstad's acquisition of Twago some years ago, back in 2017, 2018, was a really, really smart move, John. It gives them that offensive capability for the new way of working, as we said, but also a defensive strategy against other MSPs and also within their client base. But that would be my vision. I think a combination of an extension of outsourcing, of course, makes sense, but also the direct to market approach, I think, will really continue to grow.
Yeah, I think you're totally right on. I mean, one of the stats that I've been using lately a lot is that I talked to Sarah Tang, who's the EVP at Freelancer, who runs their enterprise stuff, and she said this is a couple of years ago, and I'm sure it's the same, but she said of the Fortune 1000 companies, they have customers from 70% of those, or 700 of the companies, all folks from the bottom up who have corporate emails that are using the platform. All the while, there's only 15 enterprise clients. So there's, essentially 685 companies that have no clue that they're actually in the open talent marketplace because their people are doing it from the bottom up. And that tension is a really interesting one to me, right?
Yes, it is. And John, Freelancer.com fascinate me, right? And I was speaking with Roland Rosefear today.
Great guy.
Yes, really brilliant guy. Heads up enterprise over in Europe. But there was a great report, John, from the International Labour Organization on digital labour marketplaces. I think it was released in January of this year. And one of the things that just interested me was about the utilization of companies like Freelancer.com. What I mean by that is they've got 50 million people on the platform, but there's only about 100,000 active at any one time. And initially when I read that report, I thought, oh my God, all my predictions aren't coming true, right? The open talent economy is not what I thought, right?
Yeah.
But that was last year. That was reporting on last year's data, right? And what I think about it now, if you think about Freelancer.com having 51 million people from all across the globe, that rich, deep, large talent pool that they've built, it actually seems quite prescient now, John, because they have now got the people and now they've got the market opportunity. Right. And now they've got the force multiplier to really start to have that platform not fully utilized. I'm sure they would love that though, but certainly my bet would be for 2021 that there's certainly a hell of a lot more than 100,000 people active,
for sure,
engaged. So I just thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think there's some advantages. I mean, two different strategies, right? It's like, obviously at the freelancer side of things, creating a community of 51 million people that kind of might come in and out of that labor market. It's really interesting. I think it's really a curation level. And then you've got another curation level, right? Like that. And like there are a few that are emerging, but you've got a company like TopTal that actually beforehand, like finds the top 3% of the talent, the tech talent marketplace, and deploys those folks, those 10,000 people at a very high utilization rate, right? Yes. And then you've got Topcoder, which I think is really interesting as well, where they do 25,000 contests a year with their 1.5 million people. And through those contests, they're now using that kind of contest format to actually analyze and figure out what the people are really good at, and then be able to deploy them on a kind of a talent as service, basis. It seems super interesting. I'm curious too, where you stand on, have you connected with Dror over at Velocity Network? Do you know what those guys are doing?
No, but I know John Heaney from the Open Assembly and from his previous life in Kelly, and it's on my to-do list, John, because we've built a global contractor vetting and contractor classification platform called CXC Comply, and I would love to partner with those guys because I believe they've got some really neat blockchain technology.
Exactly.
That would allow us to have this transferable, non-interruptible record. And I just think the two of us together would be something so powerful for the market. Yeah,
I totally agree. I mean, I think they've gotten like 60 or 70 partners involved. And I think it's really interesting, right? To be able to give the worker their data and be able to create a digital wallet. And one of the things I'm intrigued by is the ability to increase velocity for folks that are really passionate about it, so that they can kind of work cross-platform. I know some of the platforms aren't that interested in that because they feel like that data is the value of their company, right? They worker data, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to be a lot better served if they can give that data back to the worker, and the worker can actually, use that to say, I'm going to be on 4 different platforms, just like in the B2C side of things. Being able to have companies like Uber and Lyft to say, we want that transferability because we want people to make a reasonable living, so they stay in this marketplace, right? The best.
John, I absolutely agree that interoperability between platforms, because I just think there's such a market for pre-vetted talent to reduce that compliance challenge and compliance burden. And that's why we set up CXC Comply. I hate the phrase no-brainer, but of course it was a natural evolution. We've built the infrastructure, we've got the global capability. Why wouldn't we design and launch a platform to help organizations pre-vet talent or vet the talent that they've got in their organization? But what Velocity are doing is super interesting, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I'll make sure I make the intro because I love Dror, what he's doing for sure. Hey, just a last question. Any interesting stories about an organization that's figured it out and it's living in the future?
I tell you that an amazing company for all the technology people listening in is GitLab, who are awesome. So GitLab, and this is freely available on their website. There's no hidden things or anything like that, so I'm not divulging anything. But GitLab have an amazing distributed global workforce. So their model is, we will find the best talent anywhere in the world. We don't care if they're in Timbuktu, Azerbaijan, the Ukraine, South Antarctica. They want them. And they will have them. And what they've done that is really neat, John, is that they've got companies like us to manage from a risk, compliance, payroll, payment perspective, all those different mitigation strategies that I mentioned earlier in your podcast, John. And that is just working really well because they can get the talent they want, but reduce the risk around securing that talent so well. And they're just a pleasure to work with, and they've had this distributed model for a number of years now. Before they were even working with CXC, right? They've been working with 3 years, but it just works so well. They've got the talent they need when they need it, and they've got the best in the business from all four corners of the globe. So it just is so neat. That's awesome. Well, what a great story. I love those guys. They've been important part of the community for a while, and really, really great to see. Hey, well, thanks a lot for being with us today, Connor. Really, really enjoyed the conversation and super stoked you're here. I think you bring such a unique perspective to the community, and it's one that's really important, right? I think for all the platforms and for all of us that started from the innovation side of things, we've always kind of had this kind of a bit of, I would say a bit of arrogance and a bit of naivete on how the real, talent marketplace works, not the open talent marketplace. Yeah. So I feel like these things need to come together, and it's really great you're kind of building those bridges to the future. Thanks again for being here. Hey, John, you bet. And John, we love what you're doing and what we're doing at Open Assembly. And John, it's a pleasure speaking with you, and thanks so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, John. All right. I look forward to catching up with you on the next call.